Hello, everybody. Welcome to the interview. Today I'm speaking with Marissa Levien. She is a local artist that we have known some work for. And why don't we get this interview started?
All right, cool.
Sure. So why don't we start off with the basics? How would you describe yourself, and what is the art form that you specialize in?
So I guess I would describe myself as an artist and a writer sort of simultaneously, and the type of art that I tend to do, it's a lot of collage and drawing work, and usually what I've had the most success doing with it is using it for illustration or getting it published places. And so right now I'm actually at Stony Brook getting my master's for creative writing, and I'm working on a novel, and I'm doing a lot of illustration work simultaneous with the novel to go into the novel. And I think the two things that I do most, though I've definitely dabbled in a lot of creative art forms, is writing and then sort of more works on paper illustration.
Okay. How's that novel? What's that novel about?
The novel is about 2/3 done right now.
Okay.
Trying to get a first draft done by April, or not by mid-April. We'll see how that goes. But it's actually sort of a literary sci-fi novel, and it's about an apocalypse of sorts, and it's about this ship that's sort of the size of a small country that's been traveling through space for centuries and centuries, to the point where nobody even considers it a ship anymore. They consider it a world. And one of the characters finds out that something's gone wrong with the ship and everybody's going to die in like 2 months, and then it's her trying to figure out basically how she wants to live her life, and and how everybody wants to live their life if they knew that everything was going to end and everything was going to be destroyed in 2 months. It's a very cheerful book.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yep. Great book.
But it was really fun from an illustration standpoint, because it involves me sort of drawing a natural world, or things that seem like real cities, but I'm allowed to skew them a little bit because I've created a sort of a setting that's a designed world, and so I can play with that on an illustration standpoint, which is fun for me in terms of getting to do visual art.
Oh, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something I haven't really considered before.
Like at one point, I've just written it, and hopefully it stays in because I like the concept. Like, the people who design the world have decided that because it's a very rich designed thing, that they're going to make mountains, but the mountains can be made of anything because it's not a geological formation, so they're partially made of stained glass at places.
Yeah.
And so you can play with it, and you can skew things in such a way that it suddenly feels very artistic and very fun to draw or create.
It seems to lend itself, not only in the book you just described, but your artwork in general, sort of lends itself to that sort of abstract collage sort of feeling to it.
Yeah. And I definitely, it'll be interesting because this is the first time that I've tried to illustrate my own stories, but a lot of times in the past what I've done as sort of a jumping off point for my own sort of inspiration in artwork is to sort of, in a more abstract concept, illustrate books or stories that I love, because I'm a big literature nerd, and so that's always been a really, really good jumping off point for me. So I've done illustrations of, say, like Cosmocomics by Calvino, or Invisible Cities. I did one for Invisible Cities too, or Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut, and then really, doing a drawing that I feel like in some sort of strange, more emotional way encompasses the book. It doesn't necessarily, sometimes it is very literal, but sometimes it is very sort of just abstract. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. How long have you been an artist for?
I guess I started really doing it on a professional level it would have been about 7 or 8 years ago. I've done, I've always been a really, really creative person ever since I was a kid, and so when I was a kid I used to, take lots of art classes and do all sorts of stuff and enter all the local art competitions, but I think around the time that I started actually showing my work or trying to see if I could sell it was probably about 8 years ago, and I think it was around the time, for a while before I moved out to Long Island, I worked in an art gallery in Chelsea, and so I had sort of a great first-hand experience as to what the commerce of that would be like, and what I would like my own version of an artistic identity to be, because you're seeing how a bunch of other people do it all the time. And so I think that was sort of what put me in the frame of mind that this was something that I could do in terms of actually selling the work or showing it as a professional thing.
Okay. I see there was no issue there, obviously. Yeah, you jumped immediately right in. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, I'm sure you guys know that, like, art is never something, very few people that I've ever met, if they're artists, make their whole living at art. But I can sell my stuff. And so that is something, that's something that I'm happy to be able to do. And so I think probably around 8 years ago was when I started, pursuing the idea of, like, okay, so how do I get my stuff seen? How is this not just something that I do, in my bedroom or, at the end of a work day or something, just to, like, sort of unwind. Or I'd been doing a lot of art pieces and then just giving them away as gifts, and I realized at a certain point that I probably had to stop doing that and actually, like, take myself seriously as an artist, things like that.
Yeah. Could you describe that transition then? How do you go from you had described it as 8 years ago you officially said, okay, I'm going to become a professional artist. Was it a quick moment where you decided, I'm just going to start selling? What happened?
So I had the benefit of a few people sort of encouraging me in that direction, just sort of friends of mine, colleagues, people that that knew me and liked my work and were saying sort of like, this is great and this is really, really beautiful, and I'm so glad that you gave this to me as a gift, but you should sell this.
Yes. Okay.
And also it was a bit more, it was pretty gradual, I'd say. Like, I did start to have the idea of, okay, so I should probably be shifting this to a professional angle, but also I guess it was sort of a stair step of how do I do that. And I think one of the first things I did was I stopped giving them away. And then it was, can I show it? Where can I show it? Where can I show it and be considered legitimate? Because also, there's certain traps that artists can fall into a lot. And I think working in an art gallery really helped me from that standpoint, because I'm also a self-taught artist. I never went through like an MFA program or anything for that. And going and working at an art gallery taught me certain pitfalls, like the fact that there's so many sort of fake galleries out there that will say to you, hey, we'll display your artwork. It's going to be great. You're going to be, this will be your debut as an artist. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have to pay us to show the art. And that's never okay.
Wow, yeah. So you, as someone who worked in a gallery, you understand what they do to artists, and you know what to avoid.
Yeah, because I think, because there's a lot of galleries out there that give artists sort of a, sort of create this sort of hackles raised feeling with artists of like, I have to be on my guard. But the best relationships, the best galleries should be doing for you, similar to what like an actor-agent relationship should be. It should be a symbiotic relationship. It should be something where the gallery wants you because they believe in your work, they believe they can sell it, and also because they truly enjoy what you have to offer. And simultaneously, I mean, that's sort of like a really lovely, like rosy version of that, but what comes along with that in a pragmatic sense is also they know that they can sell it and they're going to take a commission on that. And also then you have to look at galleries based on what sort of contracts they're giving you, because galleries should be giving you a contract if they're going to sell your work, and you should see the percentage that they're going to take. Mm-hmm. If a gallery is not legitimate and is especially predatory, they might be saying, hey, we're going to take 90% and you get 10. But most galleries that I worked with, who I actually did enjoy working with, who were legitimate, were more, 50-50, or if they knew that the artist was in more dire straits and that they were, that they wanted to be able to help them to continue making their art because that benefits them, maybe they would go down to say 40-60 or 70-30 with them taking the lesser cut.
Okay.
So it was good for me to know from like a professional standpoint what people were doing.
Yes.
And that being said, I never ended up with a show like in Chelsea, and maybe I will someday in the future. But like, looking at galleries that I did end up showing in places in like, Brooklyn or Queens or out in Jersey City, stuff like that, you did look for like, okay, so what's my cut of this, or if it was more informal, say it was an artist friend, I ended up with a lot of like art handler friends, and they would generally like put on shows in various spaces, and I knew that they basically weren't in it for the money at all, and if anything did sell, it was going to go entirely to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to view what the professional art world is through that lens, rather than having to go through like just the swampy muck of everybody who's going to try and take advantage of you in that setting, because there's so many people that do. That was a really big benefit. And
yeah, it's a business for many people.
Yeah,
more than it is something for them to do.
Yeah,
and I'm sure you've had your experience with all of that.
Yeah,
I think. So how would you? How would you? What would you say to an emerging artist then? Someone who was starting off. What would you advise them on?
Well, also it depends. If you're an emerging artist and you've come through an MFA, you already have a bit of a leg up in the sense that I'd say for all emerging artists, make friends. That's the big one, is just make friends, keep contacts, start small but also start legitimate. There's going to be certain stair steps in your career. There's a point where I was mainly just showing work in like local cafes and stuff like that, but then eventually maybe you want to just like make the choice, if you feel that you're getting really good at that, to then say, okay, maybe now is not the time for me to only show my art in the local cafes. Maybe now I should be looking at local smaller galleries. So it's kind of a game of stair stepping up, being patient, and also make friends, because those friends are going to be the ones that say to you later, like, hey, you know what, I found this great art space and I'm going to put together a show with a bunch of my other artist friends. Do you want to be in it? I want to try my hand at curating. And then suddenly you're getting your work out there, you're getting it shown, and you can kind of keep focusing it on like as many legitimate angles as you can in terms of where your work gets shown.
Okay.
Yeah. I hope that's helped.
No, absolutely. Yeah, it's good for anybody to know that.
Yeah.
How about yourself? I think you've said it's been 8 years then. In that time, what have been some of your more prouder or favorite accomplishments?
So I was very happy with a lot of the gallery shows that I did in the city. There's a couple in Queens. There's one through this gallery called The Local that was really great. There was one, Union City was doing this thing where they were putting together their city hall, their new city hall arts program, and I ended up in there. I got to curate a show, mainly because, again, I had gallery experience and I knew people that might want this type of thing. I got to curate a show at the Governor's Island Art Fair at one point. Yeah.
How'd that go?
It went really well, and it was really fun. And it literally was like I just brought a bunch of my friends together that I was like, I like all of your art, so let's do something. And we put it in this old house. There's a bunch of houses on Governor's Island that are completely abandoned, and they just rent them out to artists in the summer. And so we had a house, and we put the show on for, I don't know, I think it was like 3 weeks or something, but it was really great. And then recently, like I mentioned, a lot of my work gets published in like different magazines and literary mags and stuff like that. And so I had a piece come out last year in Slice magazine that made me very, very happy, because that's, again, sort of in the level of like stair-stepping up. Slice is a pretty legit arts and literature magazine, and they exist on a national level, and you can find their magazines like in Barnes and Noble, stuff like that. And so that was sort of a step up for me, where I had been before, where I had been getting my stuff published, but maybe it was in like smaller local arts magazines and stuff like that. So that made me really happy. And then also I had a bunch of writing and art simultaneously publish in this offshoot that the Los Angeles Review of Books puts on, called LARB Pub Lab, and it's brand new, but the fact that it was through the Los Angeles Review of Books, again, it just felt like a really good stair step up in my career. And they basically were like, okay, we're going to take your writing and we're going to take these pieces, but also we saw in your portfolio that this whole other swath of pieces hasn't been published yet. Can we take them? And that made me happy.
There you go.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
So, yeah, that was a really nice moment. And so And they took and published just this whole line of art pieces of mine, and it went really well, and they did a great job with it, so that made me happy.
I had seen on your website you're also published in something called the Greenwich Village Literary Pub Crawl. What is that?
So that's actually that's not something that one could be published in, but I have been a tour guide on the Greenwich Village Literary Pub Crawl for about 10 years, and it's one of my favorite things to do.
What is that?
So it's a pub crawl tour of New York City, but it's very, very literature based, and it's based around literary history, which I'm just a really big literature person, and so what they do is they've got one in Greenwich Village, they've got one in Brooklyn, they've got one in Times Square. We've done private tours in Harlem, in the East Village, other places in Midtown, just like everywhere, and what it is we find bars that have a particular literary history, and then we just go and do a walking tour, but it's a pub crawl, so like we walk in between the bars, and then we sit down and have a round at each bar for like an hour, and we tell folks, stories of the bar, of the history, especially the literary ones. We'll recite poetry, which is really fun now because since I'm in a writing MFA program, I'm teaching kids, and I can make them think that I'm really smart because I can recite poetry.
It's all about memorization.
People will immediately think that you're a genius if you have something memorized.
Right?
But yeah, so like the Greenwich Village tour, for example, we start out at the White Horse Tavern, which is where Dylan Thomas died. And so we talk about Dylan Thomas, but then also, Jack Kerouac, Hunter S. Thompson, all sorts of folks, James Baldwin, all sorts of different writers have written stuff there or been patrons there, drank there, things like that. And we talk about how Dylan Thomas died, which involved a lot of alcohol because he was a very drunk poet. And then, we'll walk around for a bit. Then we go to another bar called Kettle of Fish, which has a really big history with the Beat Generation. And then we walk around a bit more, and then we end up at this bar called Marie's Crisis Cafe, which has a big history with certain writers like Thomas Paine, and it's got a big history with sort of the speakeasies of the 1920s, things like that. So it's basically like if you like to be, if you really, really like New York City history, that's not just like the basic stuff you get on a tour bus.
Yeah.
And if you like literary history and you also like drinking, it's just the best. And I've gotten very good at having like a whiskey per bar and not being drunk by the end, and just like still being able to recite all that poetry. It's like it's a very fun skill to have.
Yeah, no, it's definitely useful.
But yeah, it's been a super fun side job that I've had pretty much ever since I graduated from NYU and just started living in New York.
Okay, I was going to ask how long it was. For a while, okay.
Yeah, it's about I guess so. I'm 32 now. I graduated. Yeah, it's been about 10 years. And it's just a fun thing that I do. I do it a little less now that I'm out in Long Island, but every couple months or so I'll come back in and I'll lead a tour, and it's always really fun. Yeah.
So going back to your career then for a moment, now that you're only 8 years in, what do you hope to achieve in the future?
So what I would really love is I would love as a visual artist to be able to sort of meld visual art with my writing.
What does that mean?
So on one hand, what a lot of people will do with that is they'll write like graphic novels, stuff like that. That's like the easiest way to do visual art in sort of in tandem with writing fiction, which is what I write, obviously, if I'm writing about spaceships. Maybe at some point I could even consider a graphic novel, but just being able to illustrate my own work, I think, is something that I would really like to do, and to have books that I've written where there's illustrations sort of melded in to the novel would be really nice, partially because when I was first doing visual art, but also pursuing a career in writing, which has been happening for a long time as well, I felt like, I don't know if this has ever happened to anybody else that if they work in multiple art forms, I felt like maybe I'd really start to get going with visual art stuff, and then I'd suddenly switch gears into writing, and I would really only have time for one or the other, and then suddenly the other thing is stalled.
Yes.
Yeah, and so what I'd really like is to meld them enough where I can sort of cultivate both sort of artistic loves at the same time and make a success of both of them. And ideally, if I get, moderately successful as a writer, but there's illustration as well, then, that I have enough of a name in one or the other that I can continue to have better and better gallery shows for any visual art that I have, be it illustration or side projects, but then also be successful as a novelist and be cultivating a name with that as well, and just sort of be able to do those two things in tandem would be very nice. And so far so good it seems to be. I feel like now that I am in an MFA program for writing, not visual art, but it's felt like that's been more on track, which has been really really comforting and nice for me. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
This is it then relates to a little bit, I guess we can discuss a bit of a actual, maybe it is an application of what you had just been talking about, some of the work we had scanned for you ourselves.
Yeah, sure.
Kind of has a blend of the literary and the visual that you had just discussed. Is
Absolutely.
there anything you want to mention about that piece there?
Yeah. So one of the reasons that you were getting really strange, flaky emails from me is because I'm getting married. And,
Congratulations.
Thank you. The least hip thing to do ever is to get married, but that's what I'm doing. And I'm doing that simultaneous with, being in sort of an advanced place in my master's thesis, and so it's been a little bit crazy and stressful. But one of the things that I really wanted to do when we were sort of planning the wedding and putting together certain things was I knew that as an artist I really wanted to kind of express myself a bit through that, and so I ended up designing a couple art pieces that would be printed out just on the invitations and the save the dates and the things that you do for that, but I didn't want it to just necessarily be like, here's a picture of a heart, there you go. But something that really did, it was actually like a standalone art piece as well, and then could be something that, I probably will never sell that. That'll just be something that I keep because it's very deeply connected to, my relationship with my partner, things like that. But also something that on a very utilitarian level was abstract enough that I could, put it on, give it to people in the form of like guest invitations, stuff like that, and it would serve dual purposes. So I get very, very obsessive in my art sometimes, and I seem to never be able to do things simply. I suddenly decide, no matter what, that it's got to be meticulous. And so I went and I found over about a month's time quotes on love and marriage, not all of them happy, not all of them serious, from different writers that I particularly love or value. And then I had them all written out if I couldn't find them in books, and then I just cut them out and did different colors and like made sure that it was a blend over the course of just all of the colors in the rainbow, and then basically just very, very meticulously layer upon layer upon layer just wound them around to do sort of that rainbow thing that you see there. But it took a lot of time, and it was probably one of the heavier collages I've done, and in hindsight I probably would have used stronger paper, but I thank you guys very much for scanning it so smoothly when it was so very, very warped by the end.
Yeah, no problem. Happens. We get stuff like that all the time. No big deal.
Oh, thank you. And I guess it's not posted, but maybe I'll post it on the website and you can see it at some point. But there's also a save the date that I did that's sort of in a similar theme that's much smaller, and therefore was something that I sort of just scanned myself at one point, that has a similar theme of different literary excerpts, all dealing again with love and marriage, that is sort of, instead of it being a sort of just this great big swirl of color, instead it was a little bit more figurative, and they were sort of waves on an ocean, and then I had two ships on the ocean, and something that I drew and then cut out and sort of collaged on top, which is something I also really like to do. For some reason, the dimension that you get off of that is even if it literally is just like something you've drawn and you're just layering it, for some reason cutting the thing out and putting it on the top.
Yeah, it's a mixed media piece.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it does a great job, but yeah, so I can share that with you guys too if you want. But the two pieces sort of work in tandem a little bit because some of the quotes are the same and they sort of blend in. But also I get very meticulous in sort of the work that I picked to collage. It was very important to me that none of the quotes that came out of that ended up getting thrown into the collage weren't things that I believed in or were anything too sentimental or self-serious or things like that. But
why is that?
I think that's the difference between it being something that's just designed and something that means something to me.
Okay.
Because I mean, I don't know if you've ever traversed the world of weddings, but
I have not. Definitely not.
There's like you can find, and this is not to say that this is bad necessarily, but it is something where it's almost been commodified, where like you can find the same like 5 cocktail napkins that will have the same exact First Corinthians quote or a quote from a Rumi poem or something, and it's like,
okay, yeah.
all right, well, this is something that says the word love in it and says something pretty, or is this something that actually means something to me? And so like they were all authors that I personally value, and they were all books where like the excerpt was something that did mean something to me, and sometimes it wasn't even necessarily the happiest views of marriage or love, but it had something to say and something that I found to be either interesting or beautiful or romantic or wise, but wasn't just necessarily like, love is like a vase or something. And so I just, I wanted to make sure that it meant something to me, and at the end of the day, it wasn't just pretty. Because, pretty is wonderful, and I spend so much time just loving aesthetics and loving design, but if I'm going to bother to take the time, because that thing took weeks.
Yes.
Yes. If I'm going to bother to take the time, I want it to be something that means something to me on a slightly different level than just like, oh, I think it's pretty.
A lot of the what you seem to be describing, I think resonates a lot in your work. I think specifically on your website, you had a thing there where you showed the process of how you make some of your works.
Yeah.
And I forget which one specifically, but you had gone through 2 whole pencils in order to draw a black background.
Yeah.
It's very telling though, but it's also very artistic. I think you could go to Home Depot, buy black paint, boom, done.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could do that. At the end of the day, your average layman would say it's the same, but
Mm-hmm.
it's in that meticulous work that represents your expression.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and I think that comes out through here, comes out through a lot of your works. It's an interesting part of the sort of collage theme you have going here. With that, are there any sort of people or ideas that inspired you at any point to do this?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot. I'm very much a believer in you are the sum of your influences, and I teach now, as I kind of alluded to before. I teach writing, but it basically operates on the same principle, whether it's writing, visual art, just anything, is that nothing that you do exists in a...
That's very interesting. I think so. I think the book is then a perfect translation from that. It seems, now that you sort of described your own works and
Mm-hmm.
your inspirations, this book that you're working on seems like such a natural conclusion at this point. Are you?
I hope so. Yeah.
It's. So you said before you first write it out, and then you want to do the images that you're making, the pieces.
Yeah, and I might start, because initially what I thought I would do, and I might still kind of get into this once a first draft is complete. Initially what I wanted to do was sort of be working on the art simultaneous with the writing, but I think similar to how one will sometimes slow down the pace of the other, I found that it's been a fight for me to finish a novel. I've never completed a full-length novel before.
No one ever has that easy. It's a very difficult task, absolutely, yes.
And I've written quite a few short stories that have been published here or there, but like a novel is never something I've managed to fully do. I had for a long time what I called a 70-page curse, which was that I could get about 70 pages into a thing before my attention span would wane, and then I'd go elsewhere. And so I...
what have you been doing for this one? I imagine you've gotten past 70 at this point, right?
Yeah, I'm on to about 180.
Make yourself keep doing it.
I went into an MFA program, and that helps because I very much function on the idea that if people are expecting something of me, I don't like to let them down. And
Okay.
so then I figured out that there's certain tricks that I can play on my brain, and one of them is like, if I'm even if it wouldn't have to be an MFA program. If I'd say been doing that, but had just gotten together a group of friends and they were expecting 10 pages out of me, every 2 weeks or something, and they at least somewhat held me to it, then a similar thing could occur. I work best when I have some sort of schedule, and I'm a bit type A, and so like having some sort of structured system of expectation, or of I need to get this amount done by this time. I can then cheat if there's certain days where like there's just where the work ends up being crap. I can throw it out, stuff like that. But even if it's just the semblance of a structure, my brain is going to respond to that best. So that I've been tricking my brain in a lot of different ways using that basic template.
Are you going to be doing what this guy did for Moby Dick? Every page gets its own work, or how many how are you deciding when the arc gets written?
So right now, it won't be once per page. Again, someday that might be interesting to do, like maybe a graphic novel, something like that. And I remember when I first started in the program, I had some ideas as to possibly doing something like that. There's a really great other author out there. She won a MacArthur grant a number of years ago now, named Lauren Redness, and she blends art and writing in a really amazing way that doesn't quite feel like a graphic novel per se, in the way of like here's the boxes and here's like a comic book, but it does feel very literary. And so I had some designs on doing something like that, but then as I was writing the book, I was like, I think I'm just writing a book. So what I would really like to do now is, the book is very visual, and I like sci-fi writing, but I don't especially like world building for world building's sake, or when you see bad sci-fi writers who decide that they're going to spend 50 pages describing the spaceship to you and they haven't told you a story at all.
Okay. Yeah.
And so
I know exactly what you're talking about. They have their own
We've-
Wikipedia pages and everything.
Oh yeah, we've all seen those, and they're terrible. So what I really would like to do is I would like to tell a story that's more character based, it's more mood based, it's more meditative, contemplative, interesting in that sense. But then also I do like this idea of this designed world, and so I feel like I can have my cake and eat it too by throwing in some illustrations that are a bit, maybe a bit more figurative than, say, just the collaged color picture that I had you guys scan for me, but also are at least somewhat based on mood and feeling, and having sort of a blend of these two things, but giving enough in the illustration that somebody as they're reading can be like, oh, that's what the ship looks like. And then I don't have to spend 10 pages describing every single ounce of the ship or of the mountains or of the this or of the that. And so I have, right now the book has these chapters, sort of these insert chapters in between that are written, and who knows if they stay in. This is very much a first draft. And so what I've been told and what I've experienced is that by the time you're actually finished with something on the level that you might want to publish it, sometimes you've checked like half the book, sometimes the whole book. But right now what I've thought to do is there's a story, and there's two main characters, and the story is primarily told through these two main characters, and you're very, very closely in their heads. It's very sort of a close third-person perspective, if you know writing at all. Yes. But then there are these insert chapters in between, say like once every 5 to 10 chapters or so, or maybe one, not even that, but like once every 30 to 50 pages, there ends up being a chapter that's sort of an insert chapter describing a different aspect of the ship, and it's told from a much more cold, omniscient third-person narrator, and it's a little bit more like, I think last time I read it through, it felt a little bit more like if you mixed Douglas Adams with Invisible Cities, which is to say that I've read some really great books like Invisible Cities where they're describing a city or they're describing a thing, but they're really not describing the thing. They're describing memory or life or love or something else that's a little bit more sort of philosophical, and so I'm taking the time to very coldly describe certain aspects of this setting, basically, but then still trying to throw in elements of sort of something that makes it still a little bit more thoughtful and interesting than if I just say there's exactly 5 buildings and they do this and they do this. But if you're, looping that in through humanity's capacity to change, or how everybody wants things to be beautiful, or you can still twist it and really be talking about people even if you're talking about the city. But in these sort of insert chapters that are sort of not filtered through those same characters and are much more sort of an omniscient narrator point of view, those tend to be much shorter. They're usually like 1 to 2 pages, and they seem like the type of thing that would be perfect to just sort of nestle into an illustration over the course of a couple pages.
Well, that it seems like you're covering a lot there with your novel, sort of different, not just the story wise, but how the story is being told, and what you want to express with that story. In that case, it seems like that type of story only is one of a challenge that can be in general to be done, hard to do, but the pieces that you're making that go along with the work, that work that you describe, can very well lend itself to that sort of transmission, that flow from this type of storytelling to that type of storytelling. What purpose have you found that your visual artwork has served?
I think it's been really helpful. I think it's almost not even necessarily something that I need to take advantage of so much as it's something that's just always going to filter into what I do.
Okay.
I have a very dominant visual sense in anything that I do. And so, writing a book for me, I do think about the visuals of what I'm writing about, and hopefully not to the point where I accidentally end up writing a screenplay instead or something, but I tend to like beauty and aesthetics just in general, and so that just tends to filter into things that I write sometimes. But then also, I guess for this, I did sort of take advantage from the perspective of like, I wanted to tell. I'm trying to make sure I say this right, but I wanted to. I'm very preoccupied with people's relationship to things that they find beautiful, and to just how people choose to sort of decorate their own life in a way. And I'm not sure if that's really going to be the whole of what the book is about, but it's definitely something that filters through. There's characters in the book that are art collectors. That there's a preoccupation with the fact that the world is very much like our world, except since it's a brand new mimicry of a world that once was, it can be altered and designed in very strange, small ways. And so it's, I think I did take advantage of a visual sense from the perspective of, I guess there's so much that you can tell about people based on what they create. And if you had the opportunity to basically compact the world as we have it now, but you're going to only put the best of what you want in there, and it's going to be shot out into space, going God knows where, for what reason. I'm not sure if I sort of get into it, but it's not my main preoccupation. What would you put in? How much of your history would you put in? How many religions would you put in? What sort of temples? How would they end up blending over time? And the visuals of that and the architecture of that, getting back to architecture, I think that would all start to really intertwine in an interesting way. And I think it wouldn't necessarily just be about the visuals, but it would really start to, what I hope is going to happen as I'm writing this book is that it'll really start to say something about people and what we value and how we do blend together. And ultimately, because I'm writing about an apocalypse, how that can both be something that is an incredible sort of feat of humanity and of just the entire sort of history of time, how we've managed to come to this, but also how incredibly fleeting it is at the same time, and how both of those things can be true, and how a thing can both be so, so, so important and so vaulting and amazing, and also be something that can be destroyed, with the crush of a boot. And that those things aren't exclusive to one another. Does that make sense?
No, I know. Whenever anyone is told to talk about their work, it's never like, okay, well, here I go.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll come across. That's the hardest part, communicating.
Yeah,
it.
Well, and also,
Yeah.
I'm 2/3 of the way through the book, and I do feel like there's going to be certain aspects that I had certain ideas even when I set out writing it, and then there's certain things that I'm going to look at the end, and just after I've reread the whole thing, and I'm going on to like edits and stuff like that, and going on to designing the art pieces that'll go along with it. I'll sort of look at it and be like, oh, it's really about this, isn't it? Because that, your brain sort of tricks you, and you don't even know what you're interested in until you've finished the thing sometimes. I mean, that's true of so many of the art projects I start out with, too, because I'll start out thinking, oh, it's going to go this way, and then the lovely thing about art, about visual art that's not quite true with writing is it really accesses, for me anyways, a very, very abstract place in my brain. So it feels like a meditation when I'm doing it, even if it takes just weeks and weeks and weeks. Just, the repetitive act of figuring out where to place just the tiniest bit of something in a picture. And you're not looking at the whole picture. You're just looking at the tiny, bit here or there. Like, where do I place this one strip of text? Where do I draw this one thing? How dark should the cloud be? By the time that you've actually stepped back from the whole work, you have no idea what your brain was doing. And for me, my brain almost like all more logical, cognitive parts of my brain shut off when I'm doing a visual art piece. So I still am thinking about it and I'm feeding it through, but it's coming through just a much more abstract, emotional filter than anything else. And so sometimes it does surprise me. Then I look at something, I'm like, oh, I wasn't quite sure that that's what was going to come out of it, but that's great. Or, I'll start out thinking that this time I'm going to be really, really simple with what I make, and then it's never simple. I always, make it very, very intricate and complex. But yeah, it sort of applies in both cases, both with visual art and with writing, is like you get so focused on certain details and how the details are from piece to piece that you don't even see the assemblage until it's completely done, and then you're like, yes. Oh, that's what it's about. That's great. And then sometimes you see where there's flaws, and then you fix it from there. But there's always revision and things like that. But sometimes it's really impossible to see what you've got until you've actually sort of finished and stepped back.
Do you have a name for the novel yet?
Tentatively. I'm terrible at titles.
Okay. It's not done yet anyway.
No, it's not. The title, I've got a working title for it. I don't know if it's going to stick or not, but the title right now is The World Gives Way. The World Gives Way. Yeah. Okay. But like I said, I'm about 2/3 of the way through. I think I'm about 185 pages in right now. And I guarantee that when there's a first draft, I'll take out about 200 pages. Yes. Yeah. And yeah, I've got I'm really in love with the program that I'm working with. They've got some really, really amazing authors in it. I'm working with Paul Harding right now, who's won a Pulitzer Prize for his novel Tinkers, and he's been helping me a lot with all the piece-by-piece prose. They got a couple other folks. Susan Merrill, who's about to have her novel Shirley made into a movie that's coming out this fall. And she's one of the most genius people I've ever met when it comes to assembling a plot with almost like building blocks. Like she'll look at the whole of your book and just almost like Legos see how it should be put together. They've got Amy Hempel on staff there, and as a writer, if you ever want to learn how to say just the whole world in about 2 sentences, she's the woman to go to. She's actually got a book coming out this spring that everybody's going crazy about already. She's this incredibly well-received short story writer. But it's been really helpful because I have this sort of cadre of teachers at my disposal who not only are incredibly successful authors, but they actually all genuinely care about you. Because sometimes successful authors, they come and they go into a teaching program and then they sort of phone it in.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Art world is the same across all things. Some people are in for art, some people are in for business.
Yeah, exactly. But, for all of the minuscule things and the much larger blown out things, they're incredibly helpful, and it's been a really rewarding process.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see if I do.
So, let's see. So I've got all the usual social media things, which was I have a Twitter that I write on about once every 6 months.
What's the name of your Twitter?
It's just I have a great internet magic name. Nobody has my name online, so I can just use my first and last name. So it's just Marissa Levien at Marissa Levien for Twitter. I post on my Instagram much more.
Is it also Marissa Levien?
It's at Marissa Levien, very simple. And then marissalevien.com for the website, which is so easy. I'm trying to think of, in terms of what I'm doing, I had a short story and all of the, and a bunch of visual art come out in the Los Angeles Review of Books, Pub Lab. That was probably back in January. And then I just had a short story accepted to St. Anne's Review, which is this really great literary magazine that runs out of Brooklyn. That won't be around till winter. So in the winter of 2019, go read the St. Anne's Review.
There you go.
And then other than that, I'm teaching a few days a week at Stony Brook as an undergrad. I'm teaching undergrads. I'm not an undergrad, but I'm teaching a sci-fi speculative fiction class, and all my students are amazing, and it's like a really wonderful thing as a teacher when all of your students decide that they openly want to discuss things, and you don't have to like pull teeth and ask them questions. But sci-fi, everybody always loves it anyways, so it works. But and then what else? I guess I'm just sort of knee deep in the novel. So aside from short stories here or there, not a lot of other things come out until the novel comes out probably. But I do have a story in St. Anne's Review. It's called Butler County, and it'll be out in the winter, so that'll be good.
You got a novel. You're getting married.
Yeah, I'm getting married. That's happening too.
You're making artwork at the same time. You have interviews like these, and you have an appointment. So we're not going to keep you any longer. Thank you very much for your time.
No problem.
Really
this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.